Hi, I'm Heather Darch, and this is a presentation by the Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network. This is Missisquoi County, Quebec, and at one time it was the gateway for United Empire Loyalists seeking refuge from American rebels during and after the American War of Independence. Beginning in the early 1780s, we see the first Loyalists coming into this region to put down permanent roots. We have a habit of romanticizing or idealizing the traits of our Loyalist ancestors, believing they were all God-fearing, honest, hardworking people who would never do anything wrong, like maybe, get involved in an election scandal. And so we find in this beautiful part of the eastern townships of Quebec, scoundrels, thieves, cheats and liars, and also people who made mistakes as they learned to navigate this new place called Lower Canada. Today, our Loyalist ancestors, the good, the bad, and the misguided, all lie peacefully in the little heritage cemeteries that mark the county. This is Mount Pinnacle, Quebec, near Frelighsburg. At one time, there was a small community here called North Pinnacle. The first settlement here was established around 1796 by United Empire Loyalists. North Pinnacle is in an area that lies east of Frelighsburg, and it formed the northeast corner of what once was the parish of St. Armand East in Missisquoi County. This is the Barnes Cemetery. Vinton Barnes Sr. purchased land from the first settler on the Pinnacle named Reuben Dodge in 1796, but it was his son, Vinton Barnes Jr., who played an important role in North Pinnacle, not only as a successful farmer, but also as the postmaster, a choir master, a school commissioner, and a cattle dealer. He's also credited with rescuing a black man from the clutches of slavery. According to family records, Vinton Barnes Jr. found an escaped slave wandering lost on his property in 1857. He was carrying a Bible under his arm, his only possession. Vinton recorded in his daybook that on May 19, 1857, Justice Billings commenced working for him for, quote, "whatever I think he earns in clothing," unquote. This story is recorded in Justice Billings' Bible, which is housed at the Brome County Museum, but not in the original owner's hand, but by someone else at a later date. The Bible Chronicle states that Vinton Barnes rescued Justice, an escaped slave who stayed with him for the rest of his life as a good and faithful servant. Well, the thing about family stories is that they can get away from the truth. This is the gravestone of Justice Coburn Billings. He was indeed a black man. Was he born a slave? Likely. We don't know what state he was born in the year 1794, so it is possible he was born in a free state like Vermont, but that does not guarantee that he was born free and to free parents. Was he a slave in Missisquoi County? No. The records will show that he was a free man living here. His participation in an election fraud in Missisquoi County in 1820 indicates that he was not lost on the Pinnacle Mountain in 1857, and Vinton Barnes Jr. did not rescue him from the clutches of slavery. Justice Billings was a duffer, though. That is an 18th century term for someone who participates in a fraud or a trick. It's very interesting to find Justice Billings involved in election fraud as one of his first entries into the records for Missisquoi County. The Constitutional Act of 1791 did not specify that voters had to be white or male, just property owners. So this meant that women, black, and indigenous people could vote in this time period if they owned property. Voting took place in public, with the unusual practice of treating being common. That was serving food and drinks, and I don't mean tea, at the polls. And voting could last for weeks, as people had great distances to travel without a good road network. The Bedford District election of 1820 was an unusual one. Joseph Franchère had been elected in April 1820, but the news that George III died earlier that year in January meant that there had to be a by-election called. John Jones put his hat into the ring and went against Franchère to hold the seat. The northern poll was held in early June 1820, and the second poll was held in the south in St. Armand in July. The poll was open from July 2nd to the 20th, So you can see it was a long process. Jones won the second election, but Franchère's supporters cried foul as they believed there was a lot of cheating and fraudulent voters and petitioned the Legislative Assembly to investigate the election and call another new by-election. Hearings into the 1820 election commenced in January 1821 and resulted in the discovery of many abuses and irregularities being uncovered. The election results were declared invalid, and Jones was unseated in December 1821, and a new election was called for 1822. In the inquiry, Justice Billings is mentioned. He was a propertyless tenant farmer and unqualified to vote because of this fact. But he had come to the poll in St. Armand twice, and on the second time he was refreshed, which means a little drunk. But he was allowed to take the oath and voted for John Jones. He was one of 200 unqualified voters. It appears another black voter named Hannah Caesar was bribed with a pair of black Moroccan leather shoes to vote for Mr. Jones, but she too was permitted to vote. So Justice Billings helped to elect John Jones, but also helped to unseat him because of his role in the voting scandal. Billings too was bribed for his vote in the second by-election. Just before the by-election of 1822, to fill Jones's seat, Billings became fully enfranchised through a land transaction conducted by notary Leon Lalande, who supported Jones and was also the notary who tried to close down the Cognackers on Cognac Street. Billings paid $50 for 80 acres in St. Armand on the understanding that within the year the landowner, James Eyre, also a Jones supporter, would reimburse Billings and get his land back. The deed for this sale exists in the Brome County Museum. It was a tactic to tip the vote against Franchère, but it didn't work, as Franchère won back his seat over Jones. In the meantime, James Eyre was not able to come up with the cash within the year. Billings gave him an extension of another year, which actually stretched out until 1825, until Eyre could claim back his land. So on 2 occasions, Mr. Billings participated in an election scam to get John Jones elected. Billings must have acquired other land because when he voted in 1829, he's described as a yeoman proprietor for St. Armand. He also voted in 1834 at Frelighsburg and in 1841 in the elections for the first Parliament of a United Province of Canada as a farmer from St. Armand. So here's Justice's gravestone. It has part of a hymn inscription on it which reads, "On every sunny mountain, in every gloomy dell, whatever the robe wraps the heart, 'tis with the righteous well." The burial register reads that Justice died October 22nd, 1886, labourer of St. Armand, 92nd year of his life, and buried on the 24th of October, 1886, 91 years, 10 months, 7 days. Justice is credited with building a stone bridge over a nearby creek, as well as the wall and the stone steps at the cemetery. So as for Justice wandering lost on the pinnacle and a newly escaped slave, that part of the story is not true. Working for Vinton Barnes Jr. as a farm laborer is true, and he was 63 years old in 1857. And despite the fact that he was paid in clothing, that may have changed to room and board. In the 1881 census, Justice lives with Vinton Barnes Jr. and his family. He was 86 at the time. He was certainly an important part of the family if he was listed as a household member. The fact that he's buried in the family plot also says how important he was to the family. So despite the fact that Justice got a little mixed up in election fraud in his youth, we can recognize the fact that even our early settlers, that we tend to think were perfect, made mistakes.